Welcome to another episode of From Startup to Wunderbrand with Nicholas Kuhner. Well, we were having such a nice discussion before we started recording, so I thought we'd better stop and actually get on with the interview. Otherwise, all the nice bits are going to be all to ourselves. So we've got Melissa Llarena with us today. Melissa is a best-selling author, imagination coach, consultant, speaker, contributor to Forbes magazine, where over 4 million people have viewed her article, and the host of Mom Founder Imagination Hub, the podcast for entrepreneurs, founders, and creators who are moms. And not only that, she's managed to attract some of the biggest names in the media and podcasting world. I'm going to let you throw out those names a little bit later. But Melissa, so wonderful to have you with us today.
Thank you, Nicholas. I am so excited. I have not been out of the country, US, for anyone that's listening, in some time. So right now, I am so in bliss because I love the rest of the world.
Well, we're going to be talking about the rest of the world today because networking and breaking out of your comfort zone is something we're going to touch on, as well as how we can start doing this with our children. How can we set up our children for success in this world that is constantly getting smaller, and with internet, digitalization, etc., we are able to probably work anywhere in the world. So it's very important to understand and build networks in other countries, because who knows where you're going to find yourself in 10, 15 years.
That is absolutely true. And I think, when I first realized that there's more than just the US where a lot of the headquarters reside for, big brands and such, I was so excited with that opportunity. I was working at Ogilvy and Mather, for anyone that's familiar, and I was on the IBM brand. And I remember that day when they said, Melissa, you're going to be on the LATAM team, right? Latin America. And here is this New Yorker. I do speak Spanish, but I'm second generation. So it's really interesting that my heritage came in handy, and I was able to build that rapport with people in South America and support them in this way. And I will say that it's something that I carry with. It's just my sense of curiosity and understanding how different people interpret life, or even interpret, as an example, instruments, right? Like, what does a spoon look like in a particular country versus another country that doesn't have that, eating implement. So it's just very, for me, it's part of my curiosity, and it's been like that for decades. So it's not something that I can even hold back in. When I wrote my book, Fertile Imagination, that was something important to me. I wanted to include people from different parts of the world. Because if you go to a library, for example, in the US, or you go to one in Australia, if you go to the children's section, you're going to see the same thing. You're going to see exhausted parents trying to entertain their kids and not knowing how to get out of there unscathed, right? So, we have so much in common. Why not learn more about what exactly we do have in common and appreciate those differences? So that's important. I love that. It's super fun for me.
So let's talk a bit about your book. And this is Fertile Imagination, a guide for stretching every mom's superpower for maximum impact. And I'm going to put focus on the word mom and superpower here. This is for people with kids, basically. So because you want to, it must be tiring. I don't know if you've got any kids, maybe twins, maybe, that keep you up at night. There are so many expectations on you in this modern age. It must be quite tiring. And is that perhaps one of the reasons why you came up with this book? Maybe talk through some of the chapters, because I see you've got some cool themes here, which maybe you can go through.
Absolutely, Nicholas. So the inspiration for my book, Fertile Imagination, and the reason why I wanted to focus on moms in particular, or mums, depending on where you're listening, is the simple fact that as a mom of 3 little boys myself, I have identical twins who are 10 years old right now, and I have a 13-year-old. And if anyone knows the twin lingo, one child is called a singleton. So there you go. You just learned something right now. Anyone that's listening that has, a sense of all these multiples. So basically, being a first-time mom, for me, I was not sleeping. And what I realized was that was actually really important to my spirit. Not just sleeping as in like you go without sleep like a Navy SEAL and that's torture. Not that way. I mean, like when I would be with my head on my pillow on my way to sleep, that's when I started using my imagination as a child. And so I would imagine very, very cool things. I imagined myself living in London, for example. At the moment, I was in New York, which is where I'm originally from. I would imagine myself, attending an Ivy League school, for example. At the moment, I was applying to different universities. And so for me, it was something that I would do on my way to sleep. So fast forward, you're a parent and you don't sleep. And the same thing could be said if you're a caregiver, or even if you have like a puppy. Like puppies, they whine and they make all those sounds at night, so they keep you up at night as well. So sleep is the first thing to go out the window. And as a mom, I was like, you know what? I know that as a parent, we have to use expansive thinking in order to figure out life and make things work, right? So, new professional opportunities, new child care requirements, or, pet care, depending on your life experience. And that's why I was like, you know what? Oftentimes we say an imagination is only for a child. However, if you think about it, we clocked in about 10,000 hours imagining as children by the age of. And since that point, we were just not told or reminded to prioritize using our imagination, right? So in my book, what I decided to do was lay it out for any reader. And you would basically begin by reawakening your imagination. So there's 3 steps to actually using your fertile imagination. And to take it back, a fertile imagination is a mom's ability to imagine something for herself that she may have never ever seen before in her life or the women around her. So it's about creating opportunities for yourself that maybe didn't even exist. Like right now with the advent of AI, for example, there's ample opportunities for you to even make your life easier with AI. ChatGPT is like my buddy at this point. This thing, because it doesn't have a gender, but this thing helps me organize my life sometimes. And so that's me using my expansive thinking. It's like, okay, well, these are the tools available to me right now, and let me figure out how they can help me in my daily life. So you reawaken the imagination. And what that involves, so it's step 1 out of 3, is basically getting to a place where you're honoring yourself and you're honoring the fact that your imagination has a purpose for you as a parent, and it's valuable and it's a superpower. So maybe you're meditating and you're listening for that inner wisdom. Maybe you're challenging yourself and doing something that's courageous and you're showing yourself who you are and always have been. There's different ways to reawaken your imagination. The next step is about playing with your imagination. Again, I'm taking things that are usually for children and I'm saying no, as a mom, as a parent, as a caregiver, even as a marketing professional, okay, if you're looking at a client's brand, it's about really being inventive and innovative, right? With the way that you're approaching a particular brand or a particular person or challenging your life, and doing it in a way that is unexpected. One of the fancy people that I had on my podcast was the former CMO of GE, Beth Comstock. She's actually in that chapter of my book. She actually, for GE, which is a very traditional organization, at least it was in the past, I still think it kind of is now, she actually went to a K-pop concert in South Korea to, listen and see the insights around why is it that their fans are so loyal to K-pop stars. And those insights she translated for GE to use in terms of their customer experience. So that is how you play with your imagination. The step 1 for Beth was opening and entertaining the idea that there was some sort of, trend that GE can learn from in South Korea. So that's reawakening your imagination. I have this idea, what might be happening in South Korea that I could bring back here. Playing with it, so literally saying to, maybe Jeff Immel or someone, whoever was in charge at the time, hey, I think we should actually fly to a K-pop concert. And then she stretched her imagination. That was the 3rd stage. So I have this laid out in my book. I'm just using Beth as an example right now, but there's different people from different parts of the world that have the same concepts play out in their life experience. And so stretching your imagination part 3 is simply letting someone else in on what you're looking to accomplish. So it's really about asking for help. It's about networking, and that's where that comes into play. So imagine this, you have an idea right now, like in your heart. You want to create something that, is going to solve a business challenge that matters something to you. Sure, you might be limited to just the people in your neighborhood in terms of bouncing the idea off of and understanding what resources they have or they do not have. But if you actually built relationships with people from around the world, in particular, and I'm a big fan, people that have had to do a lot with a little resources, i.e., emerging countries, then maybe you can bring back that idea and make it real and have the support of a broader audience. So for me, when I think about my fertile imagination, I've brought it to the place where, yes, I'm using it for my mom life and my business life and my podcast. However, it translates for anything that you want to approach from a different perspective or a different angle.
So it's amazing that you put the process out so clearly like that. And I think that's some people just need a little kickstart to get that imagination going and have a process. You can't just bounce left, right, and center. But you touched on the networking side. And I think this is where a lot of people fall flat in terms of being successful or getting out there. I often talk about putting things out into the universe. If you speak about it, if you just keep it in your head, nobody's going to know about it. But if you put it out into the universe, tell one person, who knows? It's amazing how many times I've just spoken to an individual about something that I'd like to do. And they'd say, hey, oh yes, XYZ has just been talking about that. Why don't I connect you with them? If you don't say anything, nothing is going to happen. But I'm a gregarious, outgoing type of person. And, I've been doing this. My job has been in strategy and client service for the last 20 or so years. So that's, that's my craft, is to be able to open conversations. But lots of people struggle with it. I saw you've got some resources on your website, and you've got some fantastic interviews. I think over 230 interviews on your podcast with some amazing people. So I'll defer to you on quite a lot of these questions. But when we go into networking, for people who are a bit shy, so if you say you're a mom who's been, had a corporate job but has been looking after kids and now is trying to start their new idea or go back into the marketplace. My wife is a great example. She's way smarter than me, but she's awful at selling herself and promoting herself. And to network for her is, she'd rather, vacuum the house 10 times than do that. So,
Don't not vacuuming.
I'm the vacuumer, and I bought I didn't know you could fall in love with an inanimate object like a vacuum cleaner. So I'm not knocking it. What are some of the steps that you suggest to folks who are a bit hesitant to do networking?
So a lot of these steps, I've really broken them down in a playbook that I have on my website, fertileideas.com. And so I specifically made it for mom business owners because a lot of us have so many childcare responsibilities that it's difficult for casual bumping into decision maker situations to occur. So in the playbook, I do talk about, how you might approach networking if you're an introvert, for example, instead of an extrovert, or an ambivert, which is something that I love and I learned about a couple of years ago. So basically, when it comes to being an introvert, you have a superpower as well. You have the ability to actually listen to people and not talk over them or cut them short. And that is a superpower, because what happens is if you pair that with the right open-ended questions, you get a lot of information out of the people you encounter. And who doesn't like to talk about themselves? So you automatically get this feeling, or they do, of a warm and fuzzy, wow, this person is really interesting. Meanwhile, they just gave you an opportunity to talk about yourself. So you have superpowers, and that's something that I do talk about in my podcast, Mom Founder Imagination Hub, in terms of just, don't discount yourself because you're shy or an introvert. They're superpowers. You just have to know how to harness them, right? The other side of it is, when it comes to networking and having some time away from these what appear to be superficial conversations that are just one-sided, like, hey, I want to get a job, or hey, I want to get a client, or hey, I want a partnership, or whatever, they are very much two-way street situation. And I would say if your intention is clean and clear, that is the biggest advantage you have. That should be enough to give you the guts to at least say, hi, my name is this. I would love to learn more about what you do, right? That's just like bare minimum. So if your intention
But,
is clean,
and I'm going to talk over you because I'm an extrovert.
I'm
But
becoming a meditation practitioner, so I'm learning to speak quiet. Go.
getting that sales pitch or getting your story straight takes 90, I think 90% of your effort, or should take up 90% of your effort in the beginning. Because if you don't have a clear elevator pitch, if you don't know these things that you're talking about, you can't open and get that initial meeting or that second meeting. If you sound like you don't know what to talk, or I'd like to maybe do this or maybe that, if you waffle a bit, nobody's going to listen to you. So I'm going to stop you in your tracks there because I want to stick to this point. How can people find out more about themselves so that they've got a clear story to tell? Because no matter who you are, you could be a janitor, you could be a CEO. There's something interesting in your story, in the way you tell it, in your life goals, etc. That's interesting to somebody. And I think a lot of people feel that they've got nothing to say. What do you have to say about that?
I think it's in the relatable moments, like specific instances where you had to make a decision or you did something unexpected. And this could be in any category of your life. So I want to broaden this from only, I worked in an ad agency and I'm trying to get to the client side. And yes, I know what it's like to be held accountable, even though that's a big like concern, right? For people that want to go on the client side. But there's more than just that, which I think is why people might feel that hesitation and nervousness to like make the first move from a networking perspective. I think, figuring out what story to tell is also, there's so many layers to it. One layer is, what story would you want to tell? Because there's a big difference. If you're telling a story that has a lot of emotional gunk, that's a technical term, versus I'm telling a story about a project I worked on that I was really, really proud to have worked on, right? If I'm thinking about it from an employment perspective or a, customer success story perspective. So I think one place to start is literally write down bullet points, some stories, some moments in your history. Could be outside of the category of your professional experience. It could be as a parent, because again, you also need small talk. Right? So where are you going to pick up small talk? If you start with the weather, I mean, we're just going to yawn and totally ignore you because that is so boring and you're better than that. Especially if you're like a marketer and listening to this podcast. I know you're more interesting. So you could talk about other things. So bullets of, okay, I wish I could say this story. The time I went to a football game and it was, some major event and I got to see Cristiano Ronaldo do his thing or whatever. Okay, might not be relevant, but it could be good for small talk, right? Another idea might be, okay, so now I have these stories that I wish I could say. God, if I could only make them relevant. But then there might be other stories that point to the type of person that you are. So let's just imagine you worked in advertising, because it's so familiar to me, and you were the one that stayed there till midnight, but you were not getting paid investment banking dollars, said everyone that worked in advertising. But that was who you were. Like, it mattered to you. It was your reputation. That's a story that you might find an opportunity to share, and it shows your character. It shows that you're not driven by income, but you're driven by quality or excellence, whatever that might be. So there's different ways that you can consider the stories to tell. And you're right, networking is a multi-step process. So in my group coaching program that I have for like mom founders that find it hard to network, what I do is I have them do research research ahead of time on the person that they are reaching out to. Why do I do that? I do that because there has to be a filter in terms of the stories that you should already have pre-curated to tell the person that you intend to have a conversation with. And you've got to understand where they're coming from, their priorities, if what you're going to say matters to them, their career success, their time horizon. I mean, there's just a lot that goes into this whole thing, which is why it's a 9-week group coaching program. But then you also have to remember the stories to tell when you're there in front of that person and you're super nervous. And a lot of mom founders I have found, we have so much on our minds, there's just so much that's happening in the background that for us, it's like we need mnemonics. We need to practice the stories that we intend to tell. We also need to not have 1,000 stories, have, let's say, 8 stories, and then adjust accordingly. So if you're talking to someone in operations, maybe the story has an operational slant, finance slant, blah, 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 right? It's really important that, yeah, you know yourself and you know what stories you're going to tell, but more important, and this is agency life 101, you need to know your client's brand and business better than the agencies, really. Like when you're on IBM or SAP, as I had to know more about hardware and software than I ever wanted to in my entire human life, more than advertising stuff, which was really exciting to me. So same rules apply. And if you're a founder of any organization, any size, what I want to just say and just kind of let the record stand is something that is different and unexpected and might not feel natural would be, if you are an entrepreneur, you actually can talk to people that are 1,000 levels above you. And I know, client consultant relationship, that's like a no-no, right? It's like, oh, the VP talks to the VP here. And even in a big organization, the same happens, for lots of different reasons. When you're an entrepreneur, everything changes. You could really talk to fancy people, which is why, I spoke to Gary Vaynerchuk. I spoke to James Altucher. I spoke to people in different countries that weren't at the same level, quote unquote. However, what is it that I bring to the table? First, I'm sincere. So I'm not like a gotcha kind of podcast host. And then second, I'm going to have a different audience than you have ever had, right? So I have moms, and a lot of these individuals have, 12-year-old boys or whatever it is that different people kind of go for. So you could always be imaginative about what you bring to the table. But step one is go to the table, like get yourself there. And then, hopefully you would have prepared.
Well, you've made some super points there. One of my favorites is the preparation side, because one of the exercises I do with my class is get them to write a 1-minute bio about themselves. And it's amazing how many people haven't written about themselves. What am I good at? Where am I now? Where do I want to be? What does success look like to me? And nobody does that. And I don't know, I'm sure the same in your experience. So many people can't tell a story about themselves. It's quite staggering. And that's why I say, no matter what background you're from, there's something interesting that you can take out from your life. I had one person that I spoke to, their parent was in, for example, a janitorial job, and they were a bit embarrassed about that. And I said, that's brilliant. You've got to bring that into your story. My background, hard work, my family showed me the importance of hard work, etc. That's more important than somebody just, I sailed through life, I went to XYZ school. Those are exciting things that you can bring into your story that you shouldn't be ashamed about. So preparing and writing your story and practice. I think anything that looks effortless needs to be practice. And I love that you make them practice a couple of stories. That's like a comedian where they've only got 5 jokes, but they know those jokes backwards and forwards, and they adjust it to the crowd. Getting to the table, I think one of the key aspects there is, you obviously may mention Gary V. You've got to know who you want to talk to. I often, again, say to my students, when you're looking at getting clients, you need to have your client list, but then have your dream list. Who are the guys? Which clients and companies would you love to work for? And then I get them to say, okay, do the background research. Who's the owner? How much did they turn over? Understand the business back to front, so that when you actually do have a chance to speak to these guys, you know what you're talking about. But have a dream list. Have a dream team that you'd like to speak to. Because if you can't even visualize who you want to speak to, that first contact will never happen.
Yeah, and I would say it's interesting because my life can be divided by three chapters, I guess you could say. Kind of like a good movie, right? So the beginning, the first chapter was my corporate life experience. And so when I navigated my corporate life experience, I was very outrageous. I gotta be honest. So, for example, I wanted to work for Ogilvy and Mather. That was my dream list. There was no one else on my dream list. So, what did I do? Having been from New York, I was like, well, what would a New Yorker who's intense, and this is familiar territory, right? If you can make it there, you can make it anywhere, do? And so it was about hustling. It was about, oh, looking at the periphery. It's like, well, okay, American Express, and like they have the agency of record, and I know the guy from American Express. So, not that I did, like, this was like a senior leader, but I always had the guts to talk to people that were super cool, but super seemingly out of reach. And so, the same idea. So, if you have a dream list, I would really suggest that that list is not so long. Here's why. I believe that if they're on your list, that there's a reason for it. Like, I believe that there's something more than, oh, this person's on my list. I'll give you like a super old school example. This was my days at NYU, New York University. So I was, I don't even know, 10 years old. I watched TV and I saw someone that was on TV that was like a movie star or whatever. And that was the first time that I literally was like, oh, I want that person to attend a, cultural event at NYU. Grant you, I had zero budget. I didn't know this person and I was just learning calculus for no good reason, to be honest. But I decided to do calculus. What did that mean? That meant that I had to be really creative at that age and see if I could get this person to be in a closing ceremony for some cultural event. How did it happen? So basically, there was this moment where I remember my roommate telling me, Melissa, just give up. You're not going to get this person. And there was something inside of me, and I think it has to come from inside of you if you have a dream list. There was something inside of me that said, you know what? That's not how I operate. This person will come to NYU. And so I got that person to come to NYU. But even cooler than that, I also got Jose Feliciano, who's a global celebrity, 6-time Grammy Award winning Feliz Navidad, to attend NYU and speak for free. What does that mean? Your list could have 3, 4 people, and you might actually knock it way out of the park, you know? And don't be afraid to have fancy schmancy people on that list because they're all human. And again, if you approach it with a level of sincerity, but then also professionalism, right? You've got to know who you're talking to. Then there's a way for you to start the conversation. And no, I wasn't talking to gatekeepers. I wasn't talking to like all these people that were not the actual people. Why is that? The incentives are different. The incentives are different. If I'm talking to a PR person or a manager for Jose Feliciano, for example, I've got to bring the impressions, I got to bring the results. But if I'm talking to Jose Feliciano and I find out his daughter's name was Melissa, which is my name, and it's different. We're just having a regular conversation and he feels great and I feel great and we make it happen.
That's such a fun story. I suppose tied into that is having that person as your reach goal. Even if you, for example, didn't hit him, but you got Ricky Martin sort of low on that would still be a win. So it's good being clear of who you want. I think goals are very important. Let's just circle back quickly to kids and setting them up for success for networking. As we mentioned right in the beginning, this is a globalized world. America is still America. You can probably survive just fine in the US, but it's very exciting being in the rest of the world as well. There's so many interesting things to see out there. When training coaching your kids to improve their network and think about a little bit more about the rest of the world, what are some techniques you are thinking about or you actively sort of getting your kids thinking about networking. I'll give you just one example for my kids. My eldest has gone to 10 schools and he's 11 years old. So started off in Johannesburg, then Cape Town, went to Montessori school, then a Muslim Montessori school, then moved to Taiwan at primary school. Then we were in Malaysia for 4 years. He was in the international school, then the Taiwanese school. Then we moved to Norway, and he's now nicely ensconced in a Norwegian school. So he speaks multiple languages. He's got friends all around the world, plays Roblox and Fortnite and WhatsApps his friends all around the world. And those are obviously very diverse countries, religions, foods, holidays, etc. So we've been quite lucky that our kids from a very early age have seen a heck of a lot of the world. Not many other people have that advantage. So yeah, from your side, for either for yourself or for suggestions for people who don't have the opportunity to travel too much, how can you set your kids up for success in this globalized world?
I love that question because for me, it started when my stepmother owned a travel agency and I was like 10 years old. On the weekends, this was old school, I would stamp the brochures. So that was my first impression that the world existed. So for me, I always had that in me. And I think it made me, again, really, really interested in what was out there and available to me. So, what it is that I'm doing with my three kids. So, for us, I remember, and this is in my book, Fertile Imagination, my husband one night was like, "Hey, would you ever want to relocate to Australia?" And I spend more time looking at a menu at a restaurant, choosing what I want to eat, than answering that question. So I was like, yeah. I was like, yeah. I got to give context. We had just bought our home in Connecticut and we had just bought, like a big minivan or whatever in Connecticut. And we had three children in our midst. So it wasn't before the kids or anything. But I said yes to that adventure. And neither of us needed to go to Australia for any reason, not for work. We had never been to Australia. Okay. But I knew that people that went loved it. And so, I put my calls out there and I said, "Hey, what did you think about your experience?" And people loved it and it was safe. So for me and for anyone that's listening, like right now, I would encourage you, if there's a particular, country that you're just curious about, I'm not saying to go and get the tickets and, go on the flight and relocate your family. But what I am saying is open yourself up to an unexpected adventure. At least be open. And that's you as a mom or a dad. So that would be step one in terms of, how you can help your kids have that sense of adventure. Once we were in Australia, so we were there for 3.5 years, my children, they went to a Montessori school and they had, access to all these people that had totally different life experiences, right? And, from Tim Tams to, I don't know, the outback and like being one with like spiders, but not really having them be venomous. They were part of that whole thing. They even did nippers. And if you've heard of nippers, it's where you teach your kids to be in the ocean and surf. So for me as a mom, I was like, we are doing that. And yes, you will go into the rock pools and be one with, the ocean. So it was very much so of, not just being a tight clan and only watching US TV when we're in Australia and only, sticking to people that are expats if we're in Australia. It was about really integrating with other people who were from Australia. Most weren't because, it's kind of like the US, a lot of different countries are represented. And, being open to those new friendships, right? So I still don't know if my kids are grateful for that experience, but what I do know is that they learned Japanese. What I do know is that they, definitely understood the Montessori way and tactile stuff. So there were lots of benefits. So be open to the adventure. And then once you are open to the adventure, anyone that's there already, be open to actually mingling with people that are in that country, not just sticking to expats. I know that's a tendency, right? So that's the other side of it. from a I'm back in the US perspective from Australia, this is how I'm doing it right now. So my eldest is 13. I have three boys and two are 10. And what I decided was that my children must be ready to launch when they are 18 or 21, 22. This is just like the thing that must happen under all circumstances. So I created a rite of passage for my 13-year-old. The rite of passage for my 13-year-old is he had to compete in a Brazilian Jiu Jitsu competition. I put him in Brazilian Jiu Jitsu in Australia. Why did I do that? I could have done karate or something else or some US sport. No. Why is that? Brazil, one of the BRIC countries. Doesn't that make sense to have some sort of awareness that there's this like B in BRIC and, somehow BJJ is part of it. So everything is by design when I think about my kids and just their exposure. Then this year, so he did that. He competed and he lost. But he had a Rocky Balboa moment. So he had that chance to like get up and you could see like the energy inside him. But yes, ultimately he was knocked down. But he did it. So that's one piece of it. The other piece of it was, and that was a global competition here in the US. The other piece of it was he went to Spain and he did the walk of the Camino de Santiago, blah
Yeah.
blah blah. That is a UNESCO site, which
Very
I don't know.
famous, yeah.
Very famous, right? So doesn't that seem unusual when you think about it? I was born in New York. My mom and dad were born in New York. Yeah, Spain is a heritage really far out there. But no, when I was studying abroad in France, I read Paulo Coelho's Alchemist and Brita or whatever, and he had done the Camino. And I said, if it's good enough for Paulo, it's good enough for my kids. And so literally I was like, we're not going to do a rite of passage that's just US centric Grand Canyon. I wanted something where he went to Spain. He also realized what he was made of. And he walked, from a US perspective, 60 miles, right? So 100 and whatever kms. All of that to say, you don't have to go to the other side of the earth like I did, although you can, and it can be quite fun. You can actually have it so that during the school breaks, as an example, you expose them to other cultures and other situations. You also have a marvelous opportunity with the internet, and because of what COVID did as far as bringing a lot of things online experientially, you also have an opportunity to look at, as an example, museums around the world. During the pandemic, do you think I had them? We couldn't go to a museum, but during the pandemic, I was having them look at modern art in Berlin, Germany online. Why is that? Because I know Berlin is way ahead of its time from a cultural artsy perspective, and it's really cool to be a dude who knows art in Germany. So, again, we must launch and the world is your oyster and you've got to get to know your world and it makes you so interesting. It really just does. If they hate me for taking them away from their friends, whatever, I'll deal with that battle, right? But I think it's so worth it. And Nicholas, we would not be speaking if we weren't both open to the fact that other people have useful and interesting experiences. And anyone that's listening, I'm in Austin, Texas. Nicholas, where are you? Are you in Joburg right now or you're not?
No, I'm in Oslo in Norway.
You're in Norway. I've never been to Norway. But you know what? From a safety perspective, now, if I were to go to Norway, I could be like, hey, Nicholas, right? I could call you up and be like, hey, what's a good place? What should I be aware of? So, from a safety perspective, as a parent, and I really mean this, I think it's important to have a network that is far reaching outside of your borders because chances are your kids will study abroad. Maybe, I don't know. I did twice because it was that cool. And you want to have someone on the ground wherever they land. And I think from a safety perspective, it's important. Super important. This is like my topic. I love this, Nicholas. This is my thing.
Well, I'm expecting you in Oslo then. We're in summer now. You have no idea how wonderful the city is and how marvelous Oslo is during the summer. All the Norwegians leave because they go they travel overseas, but it's the nicest time of year in Norway. The sun, it's just marvelous, and our kids are a pretty similar age, so you are absolutely welcome. And I'll be offended if you don't come and visit us.
Very cool.
But You've brought up a whole bunch of really important points, but I think part of it, again, goes back to planning. If you don't think about these things and you don't visualize them in your head, they're not going to happen. And kids grow up so quickly. A year goes very quickly. You're going to forget about all of these things. So writing down lists. I'm sure you've got some methods in your book and other resources on your website that people can go and have a look at to get some of these thought starters. Because honestly, if you put it on a piece of paper, you talk about it, it will happen. It might not be exactly what you want. It might be something completely left field, but at least you've opened yourself up to it. So, Melissa, we could chat honestly for ages and ages and ages, and I'd love to. But let's cap it here. Where can I send people to find more information about you? I will put links everywhere, but for your podcasts, maybe give some details on that. And then where can we get this marvelous book?
Absolutely. So go to fertileideas.com. You will see a link to the podcast there, the Mom Founder Imagination Hub. You will also see the networking playbook that I was talking about earlier. And again, you could also see a book and get a free chapter all on the same website. So fertileideas.com is kind of like my hub, right, for everything that I've spoken about. If you want to reach out on LinkedIn, I would invite you to do that. I'm falling back in love with LinkedIn. I gotta say, it took a little bit. I've always been on it, but I was like, oh, I gotta love this thing. So LinkedIn, Melissa Llarena, or Instagram if you're more of a visual person. So I am definitely open to connecting with anyone that is a listener of Nicholas's podcast.
Awesome. That podcast is a must listen to, so we'll put that link in as well. Melissa, thank you so much. It's been just a delight talking to you, and I'm sure we'll have you on again. And just funnily enough, I'm going to be starting a series on bricks. It's so funny that this is how strange these things are, where I'll be talking about bricks brands. And I've reached out to all sorts of amazing folks. And that same feeling that you had about reaching out to Gary Vee, and I can't remember that musician's name now, but I did the same thing with my bricks thing. And I reached out to one of the top media personalities in South Africa. And they reached out to me, and that feeling of, wow, this guy responded and is interested in my concept just gives you a buzz, and it opens up the door to a whole bunch of other people. So I'd recommend people box above your weight, above your jiu-jitsu weight class, and make things happen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Nicholas.